So, Rachel, are you awake this morning?
More or less.
Did you know that there's a coffee you could take that would make you even more awake than normal coffee?
I don't know. My normal coffee is pretty good. I have it down to a science.
This coffee has mushrooms in it.
What? No.
Ground up shrooms in your coffee.
That is sacrilege.
And the mushrooms come from a bug.
It just gets worse. So these mushrooms that you speak of, they're part of a craze. Sweeping millennials. Adaptogens. What are adaptogens? Adaptogens is just a fancy word for a plant, really. These plants have been used in ancient Chinese medicine for centuries, but they're starting to make a resurgence because us millennials are all burnt out on work.
Yes, and burnt out on normal drugs. I want to try the natural remedies.
Exactly.
What are some of the common adaptogens that people use or maybe would be familiar with?
That's a good question. There are lots and lots of adaptogens, but some of the most common ones are ashwagandha, which literally translates to horse smell. Ashwa is horse, gandha is smell. So I'm guessing it doesn't smell too good. But others include ginseng, rhodiola, and cordyceps, which is that mushroom that you brought up at the beginning. The Cordyceps one is pretty interesting. People say that it increases your ATP production, which is why people are putting it in their coffee so that they can have more energy.
Because ATP is the currency of the cell. It's the energy molecule that your mitochondria produces. So if you're low on ATP, it means you're pretty low on energy.
And that is true. So beyond energy production, researchers have shown that these Cordyceps can actually help with anti-aging. So when they give it to fruit flies and mice, that they live longer than their untreated counterparts. But this kind of data hasn't been translated to humans. It takes a lot longer to study aging in humans.
Right, for sure.
It's also been shown to be beneficial in a disease context. So it can be beneficial in cancer, type 2 diabetes, heart disease, and inflammation.
So how does the cordyceps mushroom, or I guess adaptogens in general, do these things?
That's a good question. So to understand how adaptogens work, we have to understand just a little bit about stress. So stress in an acute setting or in the short term is a good thing, right? You need like that push of adrenaline to run a little farther, seek shelter. Stress works through something called the HPA axis, or the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis.
Whew.
It's a mouthful. We're going to break that down. So basically what happens is your hypothalamus is a part of your brain that actually recognizes the stress. And it sends signals to another part of your brain called the pituitary gland. Now the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland work together to send signals to a third part of your body, the adrenal cortex, which is located above your kidneys. And this is where the adrenal cortex is really where you secrete those stress hormones that you know about, such as cortisol, epinephrine, etc. So these stress hormones can have all kinds of effects in your body. Just as one example, they can increase the blood pressure. So if you're injured, for instance, and you're bleeding, you want to make sure you still have enough pressure to pump blood to your brain. And in the short term, this is a good thing because you stay alive.
Right.
But
in the long terms, in terms of grad school, you don't want to have these stress hormones up all the time because it can lead to weight gain, a bunch of mood swings, anxiety, depression. It's just not, your body's not meant to be stressed all the time.
Yeah, it's called chronic stress, and it can have serious health implications. So to combat this chronic stress that our generation is facing, people have started taking these adaptogens, and the adaptogens work in a few different ways. One way is that they've been shown to decrease the amount of these stress hormones in your body, so cutting off the stress response. And another way is that they've been shown to increase ATP production, because when you're stressed out, your brain is actually making less ATP. So you have less energy.
So it makes sense that if you were having mushrooms in your coffee, for example, it'd make you more alert because it's potentially helping with ATP production.
Exactly.
But caffeine does that on a normal basis too, and
Right.
other things do as well.
Cordyceps just give you that extra push.
So is there any, like, maybe clinical trials or studies in humans that they've done with these adaptogens?
Yeah, that's a good question. So just in general, there's been a lot more work done in animals, but there are some studies in humans too. So it was really hard to look this up just because there's so many different adaptogens. But if you want to know more information about your particular adaptogen, and I don't talk about it, you can look up any clinical trials that are going on right now at clinicaltrials.gov. So if you just type in adaptogen, only 4 things come up. But if you type in a specific one, you get a lot more information. So I looked up rhodiola, one of the common adaptogens that people are using. And I found 2 important studies. One of them was done in rats, where they treated these rats with adaptogens, and then they took 2 measurements. So first of all, they measured the ATP production in the muscles, because that's one of the big claims people say how it works. And they did find an increase in ATP production in the rats that were treated versus the untreated controls. And the second measure they took was they did what's called a persistent swimming test. This is a behavioral test commonly done in rodents to test for depression. So what they do is they put the animal in a container with water that's deep enough so that they can't touch the bottom, and they measure how long they can keep swimming. So the longer that they keep swimming, the more persistence they have, the less depressed they are. And they found that rats treated with this rhodiola were actually able to swim longer, meaning less depression.
That's really cool.
So people have looked at rhodiola in humans too. There was a clinical trial involving 60 individuals that were suffering from fatigue-related stress, and 90% of them were women. Yes.
Don't know if that's a good thing for us all to be so stressed.
Just glad we're getting represented. So they split these individuals into 2 different groups. 30 of the individuals were given SHR5, which is a component of rhodiola, and 30 of them were given a placebo control, so just like a sugar pill. And they were supposed to take these medicines for 28 days, and after that period, they took all sorts of measurements. So they measured the amount of cortisol that was in the saliva, and they found that that was down actually in the treatment group compared to the untreated group. And they also looked at the physical health of the patients, and they found that the patients that were taking rhodiola were more physically healthy. They also measured the fatigue using what's called the Pines burnout scale. Did not know there was a scale for burnout. Kind of tempted to take it.
I know.
It's basically like a questionnaire asking about how tired you feel. And they found that there was a decrease in fatigue in the patients treated with rhodiola. So, all showing that it's been pretty effective so far. But interestingly, when they looked at mental health and depression, they found improvement in both groups, both the placebo-treated and the rhodiola-treated.
So almost like just the act of trying to like manage your stress with something is actually helping manage your stress.
Exactly.
That's crazy. And I guess it just goes to show how strong and powerful the placebo effect can be.
Yeah, I was surprised. Another adaptogen that people have put through clinical trials actually is ashwagandha, the horse smell one. So ashwagandha has passed phase 3 clinical trials to be used in the treatment of schizophrenia. So they included schizophrenic patients in this clinical trial, treated them with the ashwagandha, and found that it had a significant impact on these patients. So this drug is on the market right now. It's called Sensoril, and it's marketed not just for schizophrenia, but also to help in general anxiety disorder. There's a clinical trial going on for that right now, but it's marketed to like improve energy production.
Yeah. So are there any drawbacks to adaptogens, at least now, like looking at it scientifically?
Yeah, I think so, just because it's so early. So to me, the biggest drawback is that these adaptogens are often under-regulated. Obviously not the ones that have passed through clinical trials, but the kind that you put in your coffee, etc. Since these adaptogens are considered dietary supplements, they aren't necessarily regulated by the FDA, so you don't always know what dosage you're getting.
When you could get something that says it's ashwagandha, and it could be 5% ashwagandha and 95% some filler.
Exactly. So you want to make sure that you do your research on whatever adaptogen you're picking, on the company, has it been tested by a third party. Another drawback on these adaptogens is that I read some, but not all, can have cross reactions with other prescription medications.
Yes, that's not good.
Exactly. So if you are on other medications, it's really important that you talk to your doctor before starting these. And they can also have side effects. Not the Sensorol. It wasn't reported to have side effects in the clinical trials, but other adaptogens can have effects on your GI tract, etc.
Well, that makes sense if we don't know what dose you should be taking, is because you could be completely overdosing on these adaptogens and like that affecting your gut bacteria.
Exactly. Too much of a lot of things is bad,
right,
you know.
Right.
And since there is just not as much data in humans, we don't really know what's a good dose for a lot of these things. Also, some people would argue that by taking these adaptogens, you're kind of putting a Band-Aid on the situation of stress, which, you know, stress is a big deal. We talked about all the physiological effects it has on you. And if you're experiencing stress so much that you're having this fatigue and depression and anxiety, it's probably good to get at the root of the problem and make some serious lifestyle changes. You can do lots of things to improve your stress by simply eating a healthy diet. Making sure you get enough sleep is really important, and like taking the time to get some exercise during the week. I know it's hard. If you're stressed out already, you probably don't think you have time, but you need to make time.
And it makes you feel so much better afterwards too.
Also, some people find that mindfulness and meditation helps. There's a lot of apps for this. I use Calm.
And with these adaptogens as well, the placebo effect, as we saw in that one study, it's pretty real. And I think that's just something to be aware of when you're planning to take something like this, is if it's working for you and it makes you feel better, keep on taking it, because the placebo effect is a thing.
Yeah, it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Right. No,
it's good. It's making you healthier.
It's helping you just decide that you're going to try and make your stress less and be more proactive about that. But it is something to be aware of, that it's a thing, and we don't really know. We can't tease apart the differences until we do more research.
Right.